right, you guys, we are on to lecture 18. We're going to be talking about the Renaissance. So, the Renaissance is a time of just amazing art, and there's some really great resources on the Renaissance. So, I'm actually going to be doing shorter lectures and having you do longer clips and documentaries. So, just to keep in mind, I'm going to be outlining some things in our lectures, obviously, but I really want you to watch the clips and stuff. And of all of the stuff we've watched, this is going to be the heaviest on our quiz and final exam, and for your final paper, which I have uploaded about. I've uploaded something about that. So this is a really important time for art, which is one of our focuses of what does such and such say about the society that made it. So let's get started on the Renaissance. First of all, we have the beginning of the Renaissance is a time where the economy starts to recover, even though there's a changing in the political climate. So the decrease in population after the plague and the 100 Years' War, this and that, allowed farmers to produce more food than they needed. So the food prices declined, allowing people more money to spend on other things. And then the demand for these agriculture or farm goods increased, allowing various areas of Europe to specialize in products that were best suited for the environment. So England began to produce more wool. Germany began to produce more grain. And as specialization kind of increased, regions had to trade for products they didn't have. Why does this matter? Who cares? You start to have cities that become rich off doing something. Rich off, just the wool trade. And then other people come with their other products and different ideas for, let's say, the dye for the wool. And this leads to the rise of city-states. So urban areas began to specialize in things, especially Italy. So the territory today that makes up Italy was divided into larger city-states in the north, and then these kingdoms of the papal states in the south. So in the north, we have Venice, Milan, Florence, Naples, and then the papal states below. And so the city-states, the Roman Catholic Church, the nobles, the merchants, the artisans, they began to just dominate society. The merchants were either like bankers or traders, and the artisans would do crafts like goldsmithing. And the knowledge of arts like painting, sculpture, architecture increased while people started to want to display their wealth. So let's say I'm in Venice and I'm a banker. I have a lot of money. I want a portrait of myself done. I want a sculpture of myself. I want a sculpture of a Greco-Roman emperor or a god. And because we start to have some really rich, just really rich people, and then also stability with the changing of food prices and stuff, the world starts to become a little better. It's sad to say that it took how many freaking a third to 2/3 of England or of Europe dying to make it so that there was more resources for everyone else, but that's what happened. So our main kind of places we're going to be talking about are mostly Florence and Venice, but really Florence. Florence becomes the center because a really rich family lives there. But before we even get to that, I want to talk about the characteristics of these new Italian Renaissance cities. So first, we have the Greek and Roman influence. Now, do you guys remember the Greeks and Romans? Were they Christian? The early ones? Absolutely not. No, they were not Christian. They had so many different gods, and the Romans killed Jesus. So they start to fade as Christianity gets going. People are like, how dare you think that Apollo is cool? What the hell is wrong with you? To the gallows you go, to the brazen bull you go. But now that there's more money and the papacy has been a little bit weakened, there's just been a lot of political issues, people start to like old things again. And the Greek and Roman influences, like the human form in statues and paintings, start to just explode in Florence. We have, just like these sculptures of Apollo or sculptures of Christian figures in the way of Greco-Roman influences. So, for example, we're going to go over Michelangelo's David. And even though David is a Christian Jewish religious character, he's sculpted in a way that makes him look like Athena or Zeus or something. It's kind of cool. We also see the rise of humanism, which is the idea of liberal arts in the humanities. For example, you're in a liberal arts class right now. This is not a science or math class or anything like that. This is about the humanity. So when we talk about humanism, we're talking about the classics, like rhetoric, grammar, poetry, history, Latin, Greek, art, liberal arts. I went to a liberal arts college, which meant I had to take liberal arts classes to get my degree. So even though I was a sociology student, I had to take a pottery class. I had to take a language class. These are part of the liberal arts education. And that started back here in the Renaissance. The thing that I find the most important and the most interesting is the idea of individuality comes back again. Do you guys remember Saint Benedict, the monk that was like, don't laugh or smile? Even though not everyone was a Benedictine monk, that was kind of the idea for a while in the Dark Ages. It was like, oh, who am I but a lowly serf? I serve Jesus and I serve my king, and that's it. And you're happy with that. Very stoic, right? During the Renaissance, we have individuality, which is like, you are important for who you are, not who you have to be, which I think is just so cool. So people started to be like, you know what? I do think that I'm a good person. I do think that I am important without having to serve anyone, which is really nice. I just think that's nice. And the next is some secular achievements. For example, the weakening of the church because of, the Avignon papacy, because remember how the church got weakened when we have the plague. We start to have a celebration of science and art and politics and writing and those old Greco-Roman ideas. The church was really corrupt during this time. And so people started to be like, you know what? I might be a Christian still, but I think Athena is really cool. And because of my individuality and my idea about the liberal arts, I'm allowed to think that Athena's cool. And no one should come and kill me for thinking that. So we just see this just huge boom in culture and life, and it's super, super cool. And the force that is driving this, pretty much, is almost just one family, and that's the Medici family. So, and let me just give you guys some context really quick. In medieval times, artwork was created by anonymous artists who just worked for the church. So if you're going to have stained glass or whatever, we don't know who made the stained glass, and it doesn't matter. It's about Jesus, not the person. But during the Renaissance, artists worked for whoever offered them the highest price. So buyers of arts are called patrons, and they might be wealthy individuals or city governments or churches. But the wealthy individuals competed against each other, displaying their wealth through the purchase of artwork. Okay? So in Florence, there was one family, the Medicis, and they were really, really wealthy and powerful, and we're going to be watching 2 documentaries on them. Well, it's a part 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, whatever. And they gave huge sums of money to artists and intellectuals and musicians, and we just have this boom of the Medici family. And our first one is Giovanni de' Medici, and he was the banker. He was the banker of the Pope of Christianity. So he made so much money. And in medieval times, just to give you guys, or Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and even later. Oh, well, we won't get into that. there was banks, but there was no, like, obviously, haha, there's no credit cards. And some places had different money based on where you were. Like, if you went to England, you couldn't use an English coin to use when you went to France. So we started to see these huge banks that will keep your money safe, one. Two, they communicate with each other. So if you say, hey, I'm just going to use dollars so it's easier for you guys. Hey, I have $300 in France, but I have $8,000 in England. When I go to France, I can access my $8,000. And that's because of these banking families. The banking families were like, yeah, absolutely. And for that luxury, I'm going to take 5% of what you have. But people did it because it used to be like robbed or killed on the way, So these banking families become really, really popular and really strong, especially, as you could imagine, the banker to the Pope. And Giovanni de' Medici ends up holding almost every political power in Florence at some point. So popular. But when he dies, he leaves his fortune to his son, Cosimo de' Medici, and he starts to make connections all over Europe. So I have a documentary for you guys, but before we watch it, I just want to go over some of the parts of the art. And like I said, this is going to be a little bit shorter because you have longer documentaries to watch. So, whoops, let me change this really quick. All right, so really quick, let's go over some early Renaissance art before you guys watch the documentary. So first, we have Masaccio. And he was really famous for doing something called frescoes. So a fresco was when you would paint on wet plaster. So plaster is like, I don't know if any of you have ever kicked a hole in a wall or something or seen those repairs, but a plaster is like a paste that you could fix a hole in the wall and then it hardens and you can sand it and it's normal and everything. And so to make these really long lasting paintings in buildings, people would paint directly onto the plaster while it was wet, so it blends and everything. And then when it dries, the color changes a little, but it stays for a really long time. We still have a lot of these artwork. And yeah, what's really cool too is people would stencil the frescoes. So you would have a draft on paper, and then you would poke a bunch of holes in it with not like a pen, but you know what I mean, with some ink or whatever. And then you could kind of connect the dots and trace everything, which is pretty cool. The next is Uccello, and he was really interested in the laws of perspective and hyper realism. So he would pick a focal point and make sure that everything made sense spatially. So in this, you can just see that if the middle is perfectly centered, everything is going at an appropriate angle, and this looks like a really realistic, a chalice or cup or something. Even though it's just all lines on a paper, because everything is in radial symmetry, it just looks really nice. The next is Pollio, and he was really interested in movement in anatomy. So we have this beautiful painting of really, it's expressive. It's still, but we know where everyone's moving because of the tension in their muscles and the looks on their face and their actions. And just like I said earlier, when we're looking at art in the Renaissance, there's going to be nudity. It's okay. The next is probably one of my favorites, Botticelli. And he was interested in the Greek and Roman mythology. And he has this really famous Birth of Venus. There are multiple births of Venus. There's a couple other ones. I saw one in France by a different artist. Oh, I'm forgetting. I don't know. This is probably the most famous Birth of Venus that you see. And she's emerging from the ocean. And it's just really great and famous. The next is Donatello. And he did a bronze style David. So the David that we have looks like he's kind of holding a jacket over his arm. That's not the only David that exists, just like we have more than one Birth of Venus. The next is Brunelleschi, and he is famous for architecture. And actually, yeah, the other Birth of Venus I saw was definitely not Brunelleschi. He kind of designs this center of Florence called the Duomo, the dome, basically. And it is the famous church in Florence. And Brunelleschi has sketches of Florence that look like they're just maps. He was a truly, truly gifted artist when it came to architecture. And my dad's an architect, so I'm always really interested in this kind of stuff. If any of you guys want to be architects, it's super cool to think about Brunelleschi. So maybe for your final project, you would want to focus on Brunelleschi's Duomo. The last one before we go to our documentary, and remember, this is only the early Renaissance, is Francesca. And he was responsible for portraits. Just like I said, portraits, although they were cool, meant so much about money and power. If you had the money and power to do this, you were some seriously rich people, okay? And we're going to be going to our Medici documentary. So we're wrapping up for today, and next class I only have a couple slides. Then we're going to watch the other part of the Medici documentary.